Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about contested rolls and contested checks in DC20 and going a little bit over the math behind that. And today, instead of going through my usual slides, I'm actually going to talk about this using a spreadsheet I made for it, since I think it does a better job laying out that information and making it clear to understand. And I'll include links to these calculators in the description, so if you're looking for those, you can find them there. So, what is a contested check or contested roll in DC20? Well, sometimes in DC20 you have rolls like the ones I've talked about, where you have to roll an attack versus a fixed number, like a defense, or you have to roll a save against a fixed number, like a save DC. But sometimes two players, or a player and an enemy, are both rolling against each other. This can show up in situations like when you're grappling and you have to roll your athletics versus the enemy's martial check, or sometimes situations like spells where a spell check is being compared to a save roll. Right? And this can also apply to some other skill actions. There are plenty of places in the game where you can find situations where a person is rolling their check again or save against another person's check or save. Typically, the person initiating whatever it is going to have to roll a check. They're never really rolling a save. So here's a couple of important details to talk about when we're talking about contested checks or saves. It's pretty intuitive. Whoever is rolling highest is going to win. So that part's pretty straightforward, but there's a couple of caveats. First off, if you roll a nat 20, right, if you roll a crit, you automatically succeed, even if your roll was lower. However, if you both roll a nat 20, then the person who wins is the one who has the highest result. If a person rolls a nat 1, they automatically fail, unless both people roll a nat 1, and then the person with the lowest result fails. So basically, nat 1s override and turn it into a failure, and nat 20s override and turn it into a success. And if both people roll a nat 1 or both people roll a nat 20, then it just goes back to whoever has the higher or lower result. Now, in general, when people tie in these situations, what ends up happening is the result remains unchanged. So let me use an example. If we're rolling with a grappling, for example, right? I'm trying to grapple an enemy, then if we tie, I don't grapple the enemy because the situation remains unchanged. Right now, the enemy and I are not grappled. I don't have the enemy grappled. So if we tie, the enemy remains not grappled. But let's say that I've already grappled the enemy and the enemy is trying to escape. Well, then we roll our contested rolls and we tie. Well, now the enemy doesn't escape because we're currently grappled and the situation doesn't change, which means we stay grappled. So basically, you can think about ties as maintaining the status quo. Things don't change from what's currently happening. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's talk a little bit about how contested rolls work and how we can kind of think about the math behind them. So here I've got two columns. I have the initiator column and the target column. And the important thing to think about here is that the initiator is the person who's kind of trying to change the situation, right? I'm either the one trying to grapple or the one trying to escape the grapple, right? You're the person who's trying to make a new thing happen. And the target, or the defender, if you want to think about it like that, is the person who's kind of trying to maintain the same situation that's happening, right? You're trying to prevent being grappled, or you're trying to maintain the grapple that's already happening. So I have the simple situation here, which is comparing an initiator and a target who both have the same bonus. So a +4 on the check or save, whatever it is, for the initiator, and a +4 bonus for the check or save on the target, as well as rolling a regular roll, right? So I have options here. I can have disadvantage to advantage, any kind of version of that, but I'm choosing regular rolls for now so that things look nice and clean. We can show off what the numbers look like with advantage and disadvantage later. So the way I laid it out is like this. The initiator has a chance to roll a number on the dice, right? So let's say that a result is a 1, well, they have a 0.05 chance to roll a 1. The 2, they have a 0.05 chance to roll a 2. In fact, we'll see that for all of these numbers, there's a 0.05 or a 5% chance to roll any number on the dice. And then what we have to imagine is basically each of these situations, right? Let's say I'm rolling a 1 and I'm the initiator. Well, then the defender, right, the target, has to also roll at least a 1, right? And so in this case, what's their chance to get that result? Well, their chance to get that result is a 1, right? The 100% chance, meaning they're guaranteed to get that result. If I roll a 2, well, then the target basically has to tie with me or get better, but they can't roll a nat 1. And so because of this, there's a 95% chance or a 0.95 chance that they're going to roll a 2. And we'll see this pattern kind of continues, right? If I roll a 3, the target also has to roll a 3 or higher, which means there's a 0.9 chance. And you can see the numbers keep going down by 0.05 every time we go down, all the way to a crit, where if I'm rolling a crit, the only way the enemy can beat that result or maintain the situation is to also roll a crit, right, a nat 20, and that's a 0.05 chance, right? So what we end up with here is 1 times our chance to roll, and then that's going to tell us what likelihood we are to end up in this situation, right? There's a 0.05 chance we end up in this situation. You can ignore the math inside of that cell. And then here we have this 100% chance to roll enough to beat that, right? So if we're in this situation here where I roll 1, I'm guaranteed to win. If I'm in this situation here where I roll a 2, well then I have this 95% chance to win, right, as the target. And so what we do is we take this value here, right, the chance to roll that number, and we multiply it by the chance to succeed when we get that number, right? So if we want to imagine here, I'm going to have the chance to get this number, and I'm going to multiply that by the chance to get this number. And now what we end up with is a 0.05% chance that I end up in this situation and that I win, right? And what I can do is I can repeat this for all these values here, right? All of these are going to multiply each other, where we have the number here multiplied by the number over here, right? The chance that I roll, that the initiator rolls this number, and the chance that the target is going to be able to beat that number. And we have all of these chances for these individual timelines, and what we do is we add them all up, right? I say, okay, well, what happens if I add up all these numbers, right? And if I add up all these numbers, I get 0.525, right? Which means really there's a 52.5% chance that the target is going to be able to succeed, right? That the target is going to be able to beat whatever number I'm rolling. Now, the reason this isn't 50% is because they win on a tie, right? So the target always has an edge up, right? If the initiator and the target both have the same bonus to their rolls, the target is always going to have an advantage, right? Not literally advantages in rolling 2 dice, but they're going to have some benefit where they're going to win on a tie when the initiator doesn't, right? And so that's why we're saying the initiator here is going to have this lower chance of winning compared to the target, because if they tie, the target ends up winning. So this is kind of the math behind it. And in fact, in my calculator, this line over here has been hidden. You don't see it happening, but it is happening somewhere else in the calculator. And those results are shown up here at the top where it says chance of success, right? So let's talk about some ways that this can get a little bit more interesting. Let's say my initiator has a higher bonus, right? Let's say my initiator has a +5 and the target has a +3. Right. All right. Now we can see the initiator is more likely to win, right, than the target, right? Which makes sense because the initiator has a higher bonus to the roll. Well, if I roll a nat 1 here, right, that means that the overall result I'm getting is a 6, right? But it's a nat 1, right? So no matter what, the initiator is going to fail, which means all the target has to do is just not roll a nat 1. And so in this case, they just need to roll a 2 and they can succeed, right? Meanwhile, if they get a 2, right, that's a bonus, plus the bonus is going to be 7. So the target also has to get a 7, which is going to be a 4 plus 3 to get 7, right? So to roll a 4, there's a 0.85 chance that they're going to get that. And so we can see, okay, there's a 0.85 chance that the target is going to be able to get a tie or higher when the initiator rolls a 2. And this math continues all the way down. In fact, you can see here, it keeps going down by 0.05. Because, you know, every time we go up by 1 in this number, right, we need to roll up by 1 in this number to match that. But the last one over here is these concepts over here. See, when it gets really hard to win is in this situation around here. Here, if we have an 18 and we add +5, that's going to be a 23. So it's actually really hard for the target to beat that, because if a target rolls a nat 20 and they add 3, they also get a 23. So the only way for the target to win here is to also get a 23, and that involves rolling a nat 20. If I have a 19 as the initiator, well, that's going to be a total of a 24, and the target literally can't roll a 24. Even if they roll a 20 on the dice, the best they can do is a 23. But this is where we have to remember that a nat 20 is still always going to guarantee success in this case. And so because of this, the target can still succeed as long as they roll a nat 20, because the initiator didn't roll a nat 20. And so in this case, there's still a 0.05, right, chance that the target can win as long as they roll a crit. But if the initiator rolls a crit, there is literally no way for the target to be able to beat that. Because even if the target rolls a crit, it's still going to be a lower result overall because they have a lower bonus. And so we can look at all this and we can say, okay, well, because it's impossible, there is just a 0% chance, right? There is a 0 chance that they are going to be able to beat this 20, right? So the initiator is guaranteed to win here, right? In fact, we can show this off with a little bit more of a drastic difference. If I have something like a 10 here to win, if I have a plus 10 to the bonus and a plus 3 on the target, well, we're going to see a bunch of these rolls here, right? Where the only way that I can win is by rolling a crit. But at the end of the day, if the initiator rolls a crit, the target just has no chance. Okay, so let's kind of reverse this logic a little bit. What if the target has a higher bonus to the roll? We'll kind of go with a drastic example. Well, in this case, a lot of the times, all the target needs to do is, at these values where the target is kind of guaranteed to win, they just have to make sure not to roll a 1. So basically, they need to roll a 2 or higher. And in that case, they're still going to win. So we get this bonus here. The chance to get to succeed in these scenarios here is going to be a 0.95 or 95% chance, because they just need to avoid that 5% chance of rolling a nat 1. Okay, so this kind of shows off how the calculator works, right? And a little bit of this nuance that goes into comparing these rolls, right? The thing that matters most is that the initiator and the target mainly need to reach a situation where it's a tie and the target wins, or the initiator is beating it by 1 and then the initiator wins. But this nuance of the roll of the nat 1 and the roll of the nat 20 are going to make this calculation a little bit more sophisticated than just having them be a tie or just having them win, because they will result in these situations where, for example, if the initiator in this situation has a nat 20, well then the target also needs to roll a nat 20, because otherwise, even if the initiator rolls a nat 20 and the target is going to roll a number that's higher than that, if that number was not a natural 20, well then the initiator is still going to win, right? And so in this case, we can see that the numbers keep going up by 1. Okay, I need to roll a 2 at least, I need to roll a 2 at least, I need to roll a 3 at least, and then all the way down to 12, but then it just jumps to 20. And that's because the second that the initiator gets a 20, the target needs to also get a 20 to be able to win. Okay, so this gets a little bit of the basic idea of the initiator and the target and their role in things. Let's go back to an even scenario and show off a little bit the role of advantage here. So let's show off advantage on the initiator, and we can see here these are the chances to roll this number with advantage, right? So there's a 0.0025 chance to roll a 1, and there is a 0.0975 chance to roll a 20, and there's all these numbers in between, right? What we can see is that in this case, because the initiator is much more likely to roll higher numbers, they're more likely to get the edge here, right? It gets harder and harder for the target to keep up because they need to roll these higher numbers to match up with that too. If we go back to the target and we say the target has advantage, right? Now the target also typically has a very good chance, right, of rolling. What we can see here is that if we compare this to a regular roll, right, there's a 52.5% chance that target's going to win. If we make it with advantage, there's a 53.3313 chance that the target is going to win. So what this tells us, if both sides have advantage, the target actually has a better shot, right, of being able to maintain that tie. So the interesting thing is to compare the difference between the initiator having advantage, which is going to give us the 64.125 chance, or the flip. What if we give the target disadvantage? Well, what we'll see is that the difference is actually the same, right? The chance that the initiator is going to win is the same if the initiator has a normal roll and the target has disadvantage, as it would be if the initiator has advantage and the target has a normal roll. So what we can see here is that basically what matters most is the difference between these two tiers and sort of where they're related to each other. So in this case, we can see the difference between disadvantage and disadvantage 2 is not the same, right? But if I flip the chances here, we would kind of see a similar result, right? So in this case, what is it going to be? Like advantage. or sorry, this will be advantage to an advantage. And we can see these relationships between advantage and disadvantage are going to throw off the balance a little bit, right? And so this is why this gets a little bit nuanced, is because we need to find each of these chances separately and compare them to these chances here to get the best representation, because of these nat 1s and these nat 20s throwing off our math a little bit. So I invite you to use these calculators if you want to kind of check how easy it is for you to beat someone, right? Typically, if you're at level 1 and you have, expertise and your prime and you have skill mastery, then your skill could reach a 7, right? And typically, if a target is contesting that, they're not going to have anything much better than a 4 or maybe a 5. And so we can see that, okay, in this situation, you're going to have a 56.75% chance to win. And maybe let's say you have advantage from something. Well, now it goes up to the 73.1625% chance to win, right? Basically a 73% chance to win, right? So you can use this calculator to kind of see what your odds are, right, of succeeding on a particular check. So this is interesting. And in fact, I wanted to show off a slightly more complicated version of this. See, there's a kind of hardcore version of this calculator, and it's going to look overwhelming, but I promise you it's not that much more complicated. Which is taking into account the chance that we can get a success by 5, right? Or some higher level of success. So sometimes when we're rolling contested checks, what matters is not just winning or losing, it's also by how much you win or how much you lose. And so in this case, we can see the differences here represented, right? So if we show off here, the first row, we can see it's kind of the same thing, right? Let's say here, for example, I have a +4 and a +4, and they're both regular. Well, then in this case, it's the same math we saw before. If I compare it to the previous one, 47.5% chance to win as the initiator, 47.5% chance to win as the initiator. So same thing here, right? The difference is when we talk about success by 5. So what you'll notice here is that success by 5 has me guaranteed to win in this success by 5 scenario. And that's because success by 5 doesn't really care about rolling a nat 1 or not. All we need to do is just succeed by 5, right? In this case, the target might have to succeed by 5 on the check, and they're going to have an easier time. In this case, the initiator wants to succeed by 5. That's a little bit harder, so the target has an easier chance getting away with that, right? And it doesn't really matter if the target rolls a nat 1 or not. That doesn't influence the success by 5 chances, right? And so we're going to see the success by 5 is a very similar math, except there is the chance to just be guaranteed to succeed here, like we are here for a roll of 1 through 5, right? Even if I roll a 1, right, there's no way I can sort of fail by 5 as the target if the initiator rolls a 1 or a 5, right? If they roll a 6, though, now it is possible, right? So we can see this difference here, and the same math applies to what we did here, except now we have to keep in mind that there's not really such a thing as a sacred 20 anymore, right? Now, if I have a really high bonus as the target, I'm guaranteed to win a lot of the time, and I don't need a nat 20 to guarantee that I'm not failing by 5, right? Critical successes only guarantee the basic chance of succeeding, but they don't help you with the chance of success by 5 or any higher levels of success, right? And we can see that the basic idea is that this happens for each level of success, right? The chance of success by 10 is actually just you're going to see here, we need at least a 5 to succeed, right? In this case, you're guaranteed to succeed on a 5 or lower as the target. In this case, if you want to succeed by 10 as the initiator, the target is guaranteed to succeed with a 10 or lower, right? And we can see that this number just goes up by 5 every time. In this case, it needs to be a 15 or lower. And here in this case, there's no way for the initiator to have a chance of success by 20, right? It is impossible. The target is guaranteed to succeed the success by 20 chance. So why is someone going to want this? Well, there's a few interesting situations this can come up with. Some of them are here. The way that the current capture weapons work involve success by 5 or success by 10 as part of their damage, right? They're going to have something like impact, and so we can add that impact and we can see how that affects things because the way capture weapons work, the impact is based on how much the success was of the contested check rather than a normal attack roll. If you want to talk more about capture weapons, you can watch my basic guide to or advanced guide to weapons videos. I talk about capture weapons in great length in both of those videos. But we can also see this in the throwing, right? When we talk about throwing, we can also see the average damage we're expected for throwing, depending on how much the base damage is or how much our basic throw is, and then how much further we're going to throw someone based on the success of that roll, right? So in this case, typically someone who can throw really well is going to have a +7 to the roll and advantage 2, and maybe they're hitting with a target that's kind of bad at defending. Well, then we can see that the average damage they're going to deal is about 4.17, right? You can ignore the bottom one here. This is just a question of what happens if you half the damage, right? As if it was split like collision damage. Obviously, the damage would go down. But in this case, we can see, okay, the average damage is 4.17, which is really high. That's a lot of average damage. But this is assuming you're really good at throwing and the target is not very good at defending themselves. And so this is the gist of comparing contested rolls. If you're just looking to get a basic idea of what my chance to succeed is, I would highly recommend you just stick with the basic contested roll calculator, where you're just looking at one initiator and a target, and you're just asking the question of how likely is the initiator to succeed and how likely is the target to succeed. If you want these questions, like things related to throwing distance or a capture weapon, then you can use this kind of hardcore version, as I call it, to get an idea of these more sophisticated chances, right? What's the chance of success by 5 for the initiator? What's the chance of succeeding, right? The success by 5 on the target. All right, well, that's everything I really wanted to cover today. Just kind of showing off a little bit of how I do my contested check math and showing you the tools that I use to work through it. This should hopefully give you an idea of how you can work with that math, right? The previous videos actually give you an idea of how to get these chances here using the advantage. You're basically asking what's the chance to get higher than a 1 with regular or with advantage, right? All right, well, thank you so much for watching, and until the next time, have the best time.